Great. Good morning and welcome, everybody. My name is Erin Gevertz, and I'm really excited to be partnering with my friend and longtime colleague, Erica, on this workshop for you today to provide some support on the parent statement, which can be a bit of a daunting process. And after 12 years of doing this and helping families apply to middle and high schools, I'm really excited to be sharing what I know and hopefully helping you move forward in this process.
Yeah, I'm equally excited to be here with Erin. We've known each other a long time, and worked with a lot of great schools that your families are probably considering. I also have done admissions at a day high school here in San Francisco, but after I worked in a national organization, so have a strong history like Erin with the boarding, school process, and college placement, and know that at any stage, it's always daunting for the parents and guardians. So hopefully you walk away with some clear outline of what you intend to write about your child, but also feel confident that you're probably doing more than enough already.
So generally speaking, as we go through this process, we just believe that it's important to keep an open mind as you're looking at schools at this point. It's almost November. And so you are visiting schools, getting to know schools. And so this is just a reminder, even though it's not exactly about the parent statement, just to keep an open mind with schools, because I think that's a huge and very important part of this process. So, when we think about parent statements or guardian statements, what do you think? And we're curious to ask you first before we tell you. What do you think schools are hoping to learn from a parent statement? Why do schools even ask for this? You're welcome to write it in the chat or unmute yourself and share. Why are schools asking for this? Why do they put you through this?
It seems like most schools now aren't doing a family interview or asking for a lot of information about your family. And so for us, it feels like the only place where we can talk about some of our family dynamics or ways that we support our child in both kind of strengths and weaknesses.
Thank you.
Yes, that's true.
Anyone else? All right, Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, there's limited interactions, and depending on the grade level your child's applying to, it will vary on the parent statement and how much emphasis and opportunity it is to provide insight. So for middle school, your middle schoolers are just coming out of elementary and they're figuring themselves out at that stage. So a parent statement might weigh more heavier than it would for high school. But the reason overall is to give you an opportunity to share insight in ways that the teacher recommendation can't, in ways that your child's still trying to figure out for themselves. And it provides you the opportunity as well to talk about the foundation you've laid out in a short snapshot since birth. Right? No one wants to know every detail from that stage on, but there probably are consistencies you have seen with your child, traits, experiences they've had with challenges that have just reoccurred over and over, and you have yourself talking about that same thing with your teachers year after year. So here's your chance to pull it all together. And as a former admissions officer, that insight does help sort of kind of provide an overview of what everything else is saying. So it is important. It's not the most important thing, but it does give you a voice to share about what you've seen since birth in a short snapshot.
Awesome. So just logistically, right? The first step is we recommend going through Ravenna. If a lot of schools in the Bay Area are using Ravenna, or if you're using the standard online application, or if you're using, some schools have their own websites and you're going through their own portals. But to begin it all, we recommend that you compile all of the questions that you're required to do, making sure to note the question itself, and also the word and character limit. Some schools have that, some schools don't. It is important that you stick to it. Some of those boxes will actually cut you off after a certain number of characters. So it's limited. And of course, noting deadlines, because different schools have different deadlines, and we always recommend turning it in a few days early and not waiting for the rush, at least a few days early. But first, compile all the questions. The second thing would be to then just start a general response of your answers. So just like we work with kids and we help them to brainstorm ideas for essays, this is where we're going to encourage you to start to brainstorm and develop your general response, and then think about how you might be able to repurpose and pull different things to answer some of those particular questions that schools are asking you. In a moment, we're going to get into the specifics of things to brainstorm. But often the prompts are very similar, generally speaking, right? Tell us about your child. What are their strengths and weaknesses? What kind of a school environment are they looking for? Are you looking for them? Would they thrive in? And so as you've been going to schools and you've been taking your notes, you're going to use those notes along with, like what Erica said, all of that knowledge. You are the expert on your child, even though they might not talk to you as much as a 13-year-old as they did when they were 10. You're still their expert. And you have a lot of valuable insight to share with the schools. And so then once you've compiled the questions, once you've noticed, the word and character limits, now it's time to review the prompts and see how they compare. So now you're like ready to start writing. As you're thinking about writing, oftentimes what families will do is begin to list characteristics of a student. My student is hardworking. My student is athletic. But what really brings it to life is when you use anecdotes to tell short stories about your student. And this is what, after having read many applications over the years, it's these anecdotes, it's these, not the whole story, you're not writing a novel, but it's a couple of sentences describing how your child interacted with somebody on the soccer field and made them feel welcome, or describing how your child, volunteered with their grandma this summer and at an old folks home and like helped to create community and really enjoyed that experience, or whatever it might be, to bring those descriptive words to life. So as you're brainstorming, we strongly recommend that you note some of the stories that will help to paint the picture of your child.
So this is connected to the handout already, and I had to really think through what statements have stood out over the years, because like Erin said, we've read many and we're going through quickly these statements because we're wanting to get to know the child, right? But now we have an opportunity to get some more insight from the parent. As a former admissions officer, I will say the entire application reading in itself takes maybe 20-30 minutes max from start to finish. This includes report cards, letters, recommendations. So you can understand a snapshot is simply a snapshot. So when we read through the parent statements, the personality traits are often things that we want to think about. And as a parent, working with parents for many years, I want to think about how would they describe their child to a teacher? What makes them happiest at home, at school? What fears do they face? How do they face their fears in their personal lives and at school? So strong statements have always included, I just recall quickly, my child is happiest. My child overcomes challenges when, and they do this, or they they face these challenges because, an example, they love modeling problem solving to their youngest sibling as the oldest child. These are traits. They're connected somewhat with the other parts that we're going to go through, but I want you to just kind of in a snapshot, in a sentence, try to think of that experience of when your child is going or when they've overcome a challenge. And like Erin said, use some anecdotes to describe that experience. So in the next slide, often those traits are connected to academic interest, strength, and areas of growth. So this is, and I don't know how to put this lightly, right? It is an opportunity to discuss their entire educational journey, because you have worked with every teacher since preschool, but you don't want to share every detail. So again, to reiterate my earlier point, share what's been consistent in how your child has developed with the feedback teachers and other adults you have partnered with have given. Example, ever since my child learned to read, they have always seemed to gravitate to the library more than the peers in their school. Their teachers have commented that, ... You're filling in the blank because it has showed up consistently, and you're using this example to describe that. What that does for an admissions officer is they're going to look for that consistent information in the letter recommendation, right? So they'll say, oh yeah, the teacher is commenting that they went to the library, and the parent has noted that started since preschool. Like how beautiful, right? We're excited about that part. So the next slide is co-curricular interests. This is something often I've noticed that teachers aren't aware of outside activities. It's better when they are. So if your child is part of outside sports teams or does dance outside of school or does academic or summer programs, teachers may or may not know, but here's your opportunity to highlight and talk about those experiences, and maybe growth came out of those activities that you want to highlight. Examples that have always been consistently strong when parents write about club, I'm just going to use the generic club soccer team, right? Like my child, has had to balance traveling soccer team with their school, and did a great job partnering with their teacher when they've had to be absent. They've developed leadership. They have carried the team through difficult moments in the absence of soccer during COVID. These are just sort of snippets of what maybe the teacher didn't know, but comments, and now this provides a fuller picture of what was going on in that moment. And this all connects and is most important with the school environment. Every school is different from another. Alta Vista is going to be different from Rooftop, different from San Francisco Friends. And so you have chosen, most of you on here, I would assume, have chosen that school for a specific reason. And so this is that opportunity to highlight, what things you look for, and maybe some gaps now as you look for the next leg of the journey. We're desiring a school that will offer more discussion based. We know that was a limitation at our school. It's not speaking negatively, it's just noticing this is something more that we want for our child, because we had to use extracurricular activities to fill that gap, and now you offer that. It's also an opportunity to mention if they transferred, and why they transferred, especially if they came in into the school in 3rd, 4th grade. Why did that happen? And some of the limitations that might have caused or gaps that you want to address. And then, because we're in 2022, if any part of the statement, parent guardian statement asked for additional information, I advise every parent to remark on how your child managed through COVID and online learning. That's an important piece, that every school did and conducted themselves inconsistently with one another. So every admissions office needs to know how your school handled it and how your child managed through that.
Great.
Okay.
So the pro tip is to thank you, Erica. It's so insightful to hear from you after having read all those applications at that school. But it's, the goal is to work smarter, not harder, right? So as Erica mentioned, there's all these different areas that you're able to highlight about your child and share insight that will ideally, hopefully, run parallel to what teachers and counselors and principals are saying. But the real goal is to share other insight that only you have as a parent and only you have as the family member. So making sure that you can often repurpose a lot of these ideas across the same questions, right? Particularly the question about, like, why do you like X school? Many schools in the Bay Area have a lot of wonderfully similar things, but it's also very important that you highlight a particular 2 or 3 particular things to that school. But if you're looking for a smaller class size, if you're looking for a more discussion-based, hands-on learning, those are some similarities that you can use across the spectrum. All right. And so once you've finished, outlining your process, it's important that we're going to take a look back on your essays and begin to edit. So I personally believe, after having been an English teacher, I believe it's easier to write too much and then start to cut things down. That's been part of what I've been doing for a long time, working with adults and families. And it can be hard because as the parent, as the guardian, it feels like every single thing is so important that you need to include. But as Erica mentioned, schools are only going to spend so much time reading your applications. And so generally speaking, for the general parent statement, like your strengths and weaknesses, Erica, I don't know what you say, but I generally say 400-ish words, like 300 to 400 words for that main question.
I don't have a word count. I mean, similar to you, the more the better, and then we cut down because there is a lot of repetition happening, and cliches I cut out right until we get an example, because examples and anecdotes are the most important part of reading and understanding your story.
Yeah, and the repetition, that's a great point. Sometimes it's saying the same thing over and over. And I find that adults tend to do this less. The kids sometimes will do this more. But even as adults, we want to make sure that, once we make our point, that's there. Now we can move on to the next one.
But I did want to make a point with that too. So when you're talking through the traits, right, there's that strengths and weaknesses. And if you're applying to the Bay Area independent high schools here, they have a common parent statement. And a lot of parents will say, this is, I'm looking for a small classroom environment for my child. And then the why question, they'll repeat that same statement. So I'm like, well, they know this already from the common. I want to know specifically, what about our small classroom environment you appreciate?
Yeah, that last paragraph about why X school, get specific about the school for sure. All right, so now let me pause recording. Can I do that? Resume.
So we've provided 3 examples here that will hopefully be helpful to you. So I'm just going to read the first one and highlight some parts. So Morgan's most defining quality is that he does not do anything halfway. This has been the case ever since he was a young child. Again, sort of bringing it back home to the start. He started a complicated Lego set or a science fiction book. He had just had to get it done and wouldn't rest until he did. Morgan lives for the genuine sense of accomplishment that comes along with a job well done. And that commitment carries through his personal life and his life as a student. So bringing the personal and student, the academic portion. Morgan is committed to being there for his friends through thick and thin, and is frequently the first one to call or visit a friend when they're having a difficult day. At school and in extracurriculars, Morgan dives wholeheartedly and usually with a smile on his face into each project he takes on, and won't give up until he achieves the results he's looking for. This is a really strong statement. It covers both the personal, social, and academic. The only probably change that I would suggest to this parent is, while they reiterated the point of the student being perseverant and resilient, I would actually want them to add an example after visiting a friend when they're having a difficult day, for example, and describing a particular moment when that has happened and the parents were impressed by that.
A little bit more about Morgan. Outside of school and his monthly book club, Morgan's committed to athletics. In his first weeks of middle school, Morgan decided that he wanted to join the cross-country team. Morgan had never been so seriously involved in sports before, and frankly, we, his parents, are not particularly athletic. But a few of Morgan's friends loved their sports teams, and Morgan was interested in trying something new. So it's great to highlight wanting to try something new. So he began attending cross-country practice after school almost every weekday. At first, Morgan didn't really like running. He was struggling to get through the team's longer runs, and doing anything halfway is not Morgan's favorite thing. Tie back to the first paragraph. But progress seemed far off, and we thought that Morgan would ultimately quit cross-country. All of a sudden, Morgan started to see improvement. In true Morgan fashion, he took the initiative to pick out a running book from the library and read it in 3 days flat, immediately implementing some of the improvements to his running stride. Within 2 months, Morgan was able to finish longer runs and started inching up the leaderboard at team meets. These days, Morgan is a casual but enthusiastic runner. He knows he isn't destined to be the fastest athlete on the team, but he finds real fulfillment in constantly seeking to beat his personal record. After finishing a particularly fast run along the West Side Highway, Morgan got home smiling and said, "I think I'm finally getting the hang of this." All right. So once again, showing this is kind of some of that perseverance that Erica was just talking about, right? So it comes out here. And talking about a little bit of struggling, right? Talking about working to get through something, wanting to try new things. High schools are looking for kids who want to try new things, 100%. So this shows that he's open to trying new things.
And why X school? The why, the when everyone worries that they're saying the same thing to each one, and you probably will. So examples help. As Morgan approaches the search for a high school, he's committed as ever to participating fully in the process and not doing anything halfway. He hopes to join a community of similar students who are ambitious, kind, passionate learners, and interested in a diverse variety of subjects and activities. I would add in some examples of the coursework that this particular school offers. That's interesting to Morgan. Morgan has always enjoyed building relationships with his teachers, so we are always also seeking a school where teachers are approachable and accessible. Morgan also appreciates an environment where he and his peers are encouraged to take initiative and craft their own projects. For all of these reasons and many more, we believe that your school would be a great fit for Morgan. With a close-knit and engaged student body that participates in a wide variety of classes and clubs, Morgan would have no problem finding STEM friends, running friends, and reading friends. Another example of when that happened during an admissions event is helpful to highlight right after this. He would love your school's independent study program, developing an innovative project idea, recruiting friends to join him, and executing the project all the way through completion are all Morgan's unique strengths. We feel confident that if Morgan attended your school, he would graduate with a broad portfolio of successes that reflect the school's commitment to helping every student harness their passion and Morgan's commitment to doing his very best. At the end, you definitely know that the family pulled from the mission statement, which is always a point of enthusiasm for the admissions officer.
Thank you, Erica. So a few final tips for writing your drafts. We do recommend quality over quantity. And like Erica mentioned in the beginning, schools only are going to take so much time to read your application. So we're not writing the novel of your child's biography. We're doing our best to sum it up succinctly to paint the comprehensive picture of your child. So, 300 more concise words are better than 500. As she mentioned, sometimes the schools don't give you a word count, but being concise is generally better. We said it before, we're going to say it again. Using anecdotes are so helpful. It's so easy to say they're so kind, they're so smart, but using stories to demonstrate that really brings your child to life on the page. And we're talking, kind of as Nicole was asking, we want to talk about the academic and the social that demonstrate all of the different areas of your child, their head, their heart, their spirit. Sometimes people wonder if they should name drop when it comes to applications and, so-and-so, my friend is on the board, or I know this teacher, and that's great. But it's not necessarily going to help your application because the application is about your child. And sometimes folks, I've had folks wonder like, oh, this board member, should they write a letter of recommendation for the child? And my question is, do they know your child? Like genuinely know? Would that recommendation provide any additional insight into that beyond what you're sharing, what the teachers are sharing, what the report cards and everything else is sharing? So generally my answer is no for that. It's not going to be very helpful.
So I just maintain consistency with the application. So make sure that what you're saying is true of what teachers have said. And if it's not true, you'll need some explanation, especially if it's the only part that shows up. And that the child you write about is the same child that shows up for the interview. True story on many occasions, right? The parent says, my child loves reading. And then I ask the child what they do on the weekend. And they're like, well, I really like the video game. I play with it. That's a perfectly fine interview response. I don't have an issue with it, but the parents really trying hard for their child to present and paint them in a certain light, that isn't true across the board. So I really like the example we just shared because it talks about Legos, right? And yes, most children love technology and socializing with their friends in that way, especially after COVID. But if there's other parts that are true, right? Share that versus the book, the library example, because it's unlikely your child's going to remember to say that. And if they do, it's probably going to feel really scripted.
Yeah. And so along those lines, it's important to be honest and genuine, right? So if you're having a bad day with your child, don't use that day to write your parent's statement. Maybe take a deep breath and come back to it the next day. Because ultimately you as the parents and guardians are showing that you love and respect your child, and you're painting an authentic picture about them to help to share who they are at home, share who they are as young adults.
And the last one, their disciplinary issues happen. They're in middle school. Depending on the severity, it is important to bring it up, which is why we say serious disciplinary actions. And I've worked with many, many students, and on occasion it has shown up. As much as the parents try to sweep it under the rug, it shows up in some part of the application. So I would rather hear it from the parents than a teacher. And so if it has happened, make sure to state it on your section and draw positive lessons from it. And so I won't go into any specific examples because it's varied from, academic plagiarism to, doing something, against school policies. But I would say a serious disciplinary action would be anything that consists of being, suspended or expelled from the school, or if your school doesn't use those terms like public, it says like, we need you to take a day off, of reflection. And that will translate to me, well, the day off is something significant that happened. So, what happened and how did they reflect from that situation?
And also we know kids make mistakes, right? Like kids are kids, so they're going to make mistakes. So owning up to it and sharing is helpful. Similar to sharing how 6th grade was rough. And then, now in 8th grade, students have learned a lot. And then finally, this is something that we used to use in a program we're used to work in. And oftentimes families are asking, what are schools looking for? What are schools really looking for? And so Erica and I, we can kind of tag the team this, but there's 4 general pieces, right? There's an interview, which or sometimes schools are recording answers these days. There's many ways since the pandemic that schools have gotten creative, but the interview or where they get to see your child light up about talking about things and just get a little bit of a personality, right? Actually seeing the child come to life, and having a conversation. The interview is not a job interview. It is a conversation to try to get to know the child better. And that's what schools really hope to gain from that. There's obviously the academic profile, which are the test scores if your school takes standardized tests, or the grades and transcripts that your school is sending over to think about how the student might fare academically in your school, in their school, and many independent schools, because they don't use traditional grades. If they don't use traditional grades, we'll often send like a cover letter explaining how to read the transcript, because it's not ABCD. There's also thinking about the students' interests and what do they want to get involved with, and how will they show up in our school? What are some things they're already doing that they want to continue and love doing? What are some things that they've never tried before that they want to try new? So that's super important that the kids will highlight on their applications. And here we have test scores. Some schools are still using the test. Some schools are not. I also think this can be substituted out for the child's knowledge, child and family's knowledge of the school itself. Like, why our school, to me, is something that's replaced part of that test scores thing. Erica, what else would you want to add to this?
Just the test scores can also be any required assessment. So some schools require the online writing assessment, where you schedule a date with an online platform and write for a time set. If you don't do that part, you're not going to have your child consider. And you have to also understand that all of this pyramid is summarized in an admissions office within 30 minutes. Right. And because they have hundreds of applications to sift through. And so there's going to be elements outside of your control. I always use the example, if it's a co-ed school, the co-ed school, right, is going to have to take like 50% self-identified boys, 50% self-identified girls to make a co-ed student body. That's their goal. And so when parents have often come up to me, which I highly recommend never to do, and compare children, right? You have to understand the admissions office is looking at their student body at the end of the day. Your child may be an excellent candidate, but didn't work out for whatever reason. Maybe that year they didn't receive enough boy applicants and they had to consider more boys and that student body who can do the academic work than girls. And there's so many other elements to it. So I always tell families, please don't compare your children against one another, because it's really, they're still developing. They still have so much to offer. If they went through this process alone, they should be given a celebration, because it's time consuming and they just want to hang out with their friends. But instead this weekend they're writing applications and taking time away from Halloween get together. So let's celebrate all that they have accomplished. They're going to find high schools or middle schools and they're going to be perfectly fine. And then I work with them again for college and remind them of this entire process all over again. Oh, I don't hear you.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining us this morning. It was great to get to know you. We hope that you found this information helpful. My name is Erin Gevirtz of Erin Gevirtz Consulting. This is my website. I am offering some a couple hour packages. If you want specific help for your parent statement, feel free to reach out to me and we can see if my services would be helpful for you. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm Erica, and I have Rise Above Yourself education, and so I support parents with their statements in kindergarten, which is much more intense. But then I work with students starting, some in middle school, mostly high school, and through college, and their statements and the interactions that they're having with the schools. So while my one-on-one client base is filling up, I am going to provide an opportunity to work with students in a short form through the video editing, if that wants, not so much the editing, but building content for that 1 to 2 minute script. And I only have a few slots. I have just some more information that's given on that student video workshop. If you'd like to learn more or be put on the wait list for it, I've created a link to Nicole, but now to everyone. So feel free to just put your information down. You're not obligated, but I could share more about that workshop.
That sounds great. Yeah, I love it. So this is us. I'm going to stop recording.